Hello and welcome to a Rocket Jump Events video. My name is Adam Burt and today I'm joined by Elle Osili-Wood, a television presenter, games journalist and voice actor. Now usually
Hello.
Rocket Jump Events are a chance for people from all walks of the gaming industry to come together, mingle and learn from each other, and unfortunately this year we can't really do that safely in person, so we're doing video interviews instead. And I want to thank Elle for joining us today to talk about her experiences. Elle, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I feel like I'm giving the standard intro that everybody is, which is just busy but good.
Busy
so.
but good. That is
Yeah.
the best way to be, especially at the minute.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like every interview this year has to start like this. 2020 has been such a unusual year in the context of every industry, but gaming as well. Really unusual, really strange. Lots of people having to adapt the way that they work. When you look back on 2020 in terms of the industry, what do you think the impact's going to be? Like, what do you think 2020 is going to be remembered for in gaming terms?
Well, first of all, congratulations on doing that question without saying the word unprecedented.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, kind of what's come out of this is just this extended period of, self-reflection for our industry. We've kind of considered so many different issues, whether that's what it's like to be in the workplace. We've obviously talked more about what diversity means, what genuine diversity means, whether that exists in kind of the studios and general kind of games industry infrastructure. We've looked at mental health, I think, quite significantly throughout this period. We've looked at, if anything, as well, something I've been really interested in is what it's like to see essentially the games calendar wiped clean and how we speak to consumers, how we talk about games, how we talk about games that are, delayed with no end in sight. So it's actually been this really interesting, I think, introspective period, whether you like it or not, it has been introspective. I'm kind of really interested to see what comes out of it, what we just forget about next year, what actually changes. I think in particular the workplace is going to be really interesting because for me, I've kind of seen this really strong 50-50 divide, it feels like to me, between people who have enjoyed spending more time at home and not having a commute and spending more time with kind of, family, and then people who've hated spending more time with family and who love the office and miss that kind of, really exciting, collaborative, nature that I think games industry workplaces have. So, I think we've got lots and lots of potential change. It's that kind of limbo state of not knowing what's happening. We don't know if 2021 will be vastly different to 2020. And then, can we make those changes?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think games as well, like, especially where there's so much like data transfer, it's not an industry that's necessarily that well suited to being distributed in the way that we force people to do this year. What have you been playing this year? What have you been loving? What's been taking up residency on your TV the last few months?
Ooh, lots of things. I'm a big kind of scattergun game player, but in particular, I have been just truly obsessed with Ghost of Tsushima. So that for me has been just this incredible standout game that I wasn't really expecting it to be. So, obviously we've known about it for years and I was excited about the concept. I love Japan. Who doesn't love samurai? But it's, for me, I don't think I was expecting it to be, I thought prior to it coming out that it looked, great, polished, obviously beautiful, but a little bit rote, a little bit play by numbers, which some people definitely still felt when it came out. But I felt that it was hugely innovative and exciting and a world that I was just desperate to spend more time in, which I think I'm somebody who can really bounce off kind of open world RPGs. I'll get really into them for a little bit, then I'm out. There's too much to do. I looked at my checklist. I had a breakdown. I'm not doing it anymore. And for me, it really kind of I saw somebody. I can't remember who. Somebody from Naughty Dog. Sorry, I'm stealing your line. But they said it kind of sanded off lots of the edges, the rough edges of open world RPGs. And for me, it was exactly that. Really kind of like fast travel that was just lightning fast and. The guiding wind. Oh, I just, absolutely fantastic. Made me feel as though, I was being pushed by some kind of divine force to my goal all the way through. I just, I played it in a big chunk, played some other things I had to for work, and then came back and platinumed it, which I don't often do. I'm not a big kind of platinum seeker. So, that for me meant that I absolutely loved that game. And then kind of outside of that, I play a lot of COD. I'm a big COD person, so I'm always kind of jumping in to Warzone, especially because everyone's at home now, so I know they're there. I know they can get online to squad up. Yeah, there's no excuses. And I also replayed Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which I was just a terrifying experience to play during lockdown, because obviously, I don't think it's spoilers to say that there's kind of a quarantine scenario in that game, and so much of it was incredibly similar. There was a scene where we were listening to people arguing about whether or not it was that serious and whether they needed to follow government precautions, and I was just like, oh wow, this is
maybe
really
a little bit
meta.
too real. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I've definitely, I think for all of us, games have just been such this really wonderful form of escapism for me. And in particular, Short Hike as well. I played that, finally got around to it. People have been saying obviously for ages, and that's just such a lovely breath of fresh air. I absolutely fell in love with that. And I'm not really like I know people really love kind of wholesome, cutesy games, but that tends to not be my thing. I'm like a big FPS girl, so I wasn't sure if I was going to love it as much as everybody said. And then I just loved it way more. So it was really great.
Yeah, it's really charming, isn't it? I love that as well. Speaking of charming, I feel like I have to ask, you've played some Fall Guys. I've seen you play Fall Guys on YouTube. When it comes to Fall Guys, you have to pick a team: red team, blue team, or yellow team. What are you saying? Where does your allegiance lie?
Well, I played Fall Guys for a very long time, and as in like just played it in the beta and things. And then until like I think maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I had never not been on the yellow team, and I didn't understand. I genuinely, to the point that I thought the yellow team was just always
yellow.
I thought that there was. Yeah, so I thought you always, every player saw themselves as the yellow team. And so I thought that all the jokes were like, oh, I am rubbish, get the yellow team out type thing. And I'd always, I think like I assume not always, but I'd never had this kind of losing streak that everyone talks about. So I'd always had really, really great runs with the yellow team. We'd always like completely smashed it. So I was like, oh, this is such a funny meme. And then just one day I got put on the red team and I was like, wait, what? So I've got a weird soft spot for the yellow team, because I genuinely had a really good run early on in Fall Guys with it.
Justice for yellows.
Yeah, honestly, I'm like, come on, we've got so much untapped potential to uncover. Like, let's do it, gang.
And I've got to ask as well, we've got 2 new consoles coming at us this year. Will you be joining one of them? Are you going to buy them both? What are your feelings about the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X?
Oh, I'm a both girl, so obviously I just need both for work. So I'll just be getting both. There's not really like a huge side for me to pick there. I unfortunately luxury or incredibly expensive, but so I will just be getting both. But I mean, for me, it's so interesting. It obviously has to be. I think in so many ways, this is such an interesting, launch of a new generation for me, because one, I think a lot of people, I've had this discussion over and over, don't really feel like we're there yet. I've spoken to lots of people who said, particularly if they kind of upgraded mid-gen to like say a PS4 Pro or whatever, they are not ready to move up yet. They don't really feel like they're at that point that perhaps we felt last generation, where you're like, yeah, we're really kind of, other than say like a PS4's fans going absolutely crazy whenever you play something a little bit intensive. But even I haven't really had that problem. So I don't really feel kind of like desperate for next generation, other than those like sweet, super fast loading times.
Yeah.
So that kind of is strange to me. Then obviously 2020, we've suddenly now, the idea that Xbox is going to launch its next gen console without Halo is just, bonkers.
It's pretty crazy.
It's just so, and it's such a perception issue, because for me, what Xbox is offering is streaming, is accessibility, is Game Pass. Game Pass is mind blowing. It's genuinely one of the most incredible things that we've seen in decades for games. And it's, people talk about how they hoped Stadia would be a Netflix for games. And obviously that isn't really the case, to the point, that they had to come out and be like, we are not Netflix for games. And then you've got Game Pass right there, cheap, so many games, so many brilliant games.
Yeah.
You can play them on your phone. You can, it's literally incredible. So I feel like they're perhaps downplaying that a little bit. The idea that, people are saying, oh, I wouldn't buy an Xbox Day One because it hasn't got Halo. And I'm like, but you've got hundreds of other brilliant games that you could play instantly. You've got access to a free kind of Day One release. So for me, Xbox is totally still a viable buy, but we've suddenly seen this massive perception shift, which I think is also, Sony have been really smart, and they've shown us games And they weren't even the most exciting games in the world, but they made us feel excited. In particular, I think kind of looking at that, the next gen loading times, they very cleverly kind of snuck them in. They were like, oh, by the way, every time you dimension shift, that was a travel. And you're like, what? Whoa, what?
That was the loading screen. It just went past. Like, you missed it.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't even, it's not like it's a game I'm even particularly excited about, but you're just blown away. And so they've been really smart about kind of keeping quiet and then just doing big, exciting kind of, info dumps. And so I'm a little bit worried that Xbox are falling behind. Obviously, they got outsold 2-1 this generation, and I'm really excited to see what they do in the next. But for me, I feel as though console isn't that important to them. So, perhaps they're not that worried whether you pick one up day one, because, their big push is
as long as
you can play anywhere. Exactly. So we shall see.
So I want to talk to you a bit about your journey and your kind of pursuits in the industry. As a presenter, you've interviewed some of the biggest names in the business, and I wanted to ask whether there are any of those that really stood out to you as being your favourite, if you have any particularly fond memories from those interviews.
I think Amy Hennig. So I just have forever been just an enormous fan of hers. She is, she's just trailblazing in so many different ways. Of course, when I was younger, you didn't see senior women in the games industry, and she's so brilliantly strident. She's unapologetic. She is, for me, she's never skirted around being a woman in that industry, or and she doesn't she's just unapologetic. I think that's the word I'm looking for, really, is that she just is this brilliant character, a really kind of strong person, and then brilliant on top of it. So not only is she kind of tenacious and a really dogged worker, but she just is someone who has just redefined what storytelling is in games, the standards we should be setting. When we look at what we considered story in a game before that, it was pretty appalling.
We've come a long way.
So it's so exciting to look at her body of work and to see what she kind of added. The fact that we're not ever getting her Star Wars game will haunt me until the day I die. I cannot bear it. And she just is, personally, she's a really, when I talked to her, she was such a lovely person. She gave me really great personal advice about writing. She was so, she's one of those people that made it to a certain point and then she's not pulling up the ladder behind her. She's not, guarded about how she got there. She just wants to see, anybody who's willing to put in the work following her footsteps. And so the fact that she was kind of so open and wonderful, and that's definitely not always the case in the games industry, it really kind of blew me away. She was just such a wonderful, lovely person, on top of just being brilliant, which is sickening, frankly. It's almost too much.
A bit jealous. We're all jealous.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? I'm like, all right, calm down. You don't need to be lovely as well. Like...
So there'll be people out there who maybe want to get into games journalism, and I'm interested if you have any advice for people out there who are looking to get into the industry. What was your kind of journey like? How did you, navigate that, and what kind of advice would you give people?
So my journey was, I would say it was a bit of a different journey, but I think actually there is no one standard journey into the industry. And every time I talk to someone, they were like, oh, I used to be like a physicist and now I'm a games journalist. So it's always something that feels a little left field. So I guess actually mine is probably more straightforward than that, which is I started out in politics and moved into political journalism at the BBC. I was a political journalist there, basically really wanted to cover games, asked them if I could do it kind of on the side in my own time. And they said yes. So that was kind of really lucky for me, and that built the base of my portfolio. So then as games kind of, obviously this was like 10 years ago, a bit more than 10 years ago. And so games weren't quite as mainstream as they were now. And so it meant that I was reasonably prominent in that space, which was, very fortunate for me. It meant that people were just Googling games journalists. I was there, particularly if they wanted somebody on screen, which at the time, there really wasn't much any game content on screen. And so, there were very few of us who did it. And kind of from there, I really worked on, and this would kind of be my advice, being really public about my work, building a public portfolio, creating a YouTube channel where I made videos on things I thought were interesting, or I streamed games, or that kind of thing. And just making sure that my work was out there, that I was on Twitter, I think genuinely in like 2008. So I was literally like,
early adopter.
Do you know what I mean? Like I was like, anything I can use to get my work out there. And that's what I say to people now is visibility is just, for me, the single biggest part of my career. And sometimes it's tedious. Like, I'm not I wouldn't genuinely be a big social media fan if it wasn't for my work, but I have to be. I have to continually tweet about what I'm doing, what I've been up to, where you can watch me. But that for me means that people come to me for work. That means that I built a career that is now based on people approaching me, bringing me exciting products, and that's because I've made myself discoverable.
Yeah.
So for me, one of the things I really struggle with is lots of people love games and they think that that's enough. And I'm like, everybody loves games. Our last big reliable
Yeah.
survey showed that 50% of everybody in the UK plays games regularly. So that is not your special element. When I've been looking for people to come and do some work with me, say on a documentary I was filming recently, people will just send me a message that just says, "Oh yeah, I'd love to. I love games," and I'm like, everybody
What
loves
else?
games. Do you have videos you can show me? Do you have articles you've written? Can you edit? Can you produce? Can you write a script? These are all the things that you need. And I think particularly for games journalism, people forget that it's journalism. So for me, when I say recently worked at PlayStation, I had to edit. I have to know how to edit. I have to know how to film. I have to know how to interview people. I have to know how to write a script. I have to know sound design. I have to, know graphic design. So
Yeah.
it's the idea that people think that they can get by just loving games and that this will suddenly manifest them a job is something that I think is kind of to blame. Social media is kind of to blame there, in that you don't really see the hard work behind what people do. We often see people doing things we think are really exciting, and it feels like a job they just fell into, when often they've been working for years and they've got so many more skills than you're aware of. So I just always say to people, you need a portfolio. For me, if you want to do what I do right now, if you want to do this kind of on-screen games journalism, you need to know how to edit. You need to know how to film yourself. You need to have a reasonable setup at home to film yourself, which is an expense. Genuinely, I've spent years building up a studio at home. So I, have a full broadcast studio in my house.
It looks good, by the way. It looks really good.
Thank you. But so it's about making sure that when those jobs do pop up, and they do pop up, I think people think it's harder to get into games journalism than it actually is. We have jobs cycle through fairly regularly, sadly, because actually people burn out and leave. And I'm not going to say that when you start out in games journalism, it's the best paid job, but it is once you've done it for a while, and you can kind of command better day rate, and just have something to show me. So if I say tomorrow, I'm gonna, I've got a dream games journalism job, I want your portfolio. I want you to send me videos you've already made. I want to know what your editing skills are, what cameras you can use. That's what I'm looking for, because I'm going to go ahead and assume you love games if you're applying for a games journalism job. So make sure you've got the skills to back it up.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I wanted to ask you about your podcast for the BBC as well, actually. So you've got a podcast, people can check it out on BBC Sounds. You spent some time looking into the science of video games and whether they're actually good for us or bad for us. What are some of the kind of surprising benefits of gaming that you discovered through that people might not be aware of?
I think there's kind of two things I would say. One is that it's just absurdly good for us in a way that, I'd always hoped and felt as though games were good for me, but never had anything to back up. And having kind of looked through the studies myself and spoken to people, in particular, I spoke to one psychologist who's kind of he's an expert in the area of children's play and how that affects their development. And he's really spent a long time not only looking at videos, but looking at work around video games so that he can confidently give parents his advice on whether video games are good or bad for you. And he literally, I was so surprised that when I interviewed him, Dr. Peter Gray, he literally said, games make you more intelligent. Looking at the science, looking at the studies, there's no doubt about it for him. He thinks games genuinely improve, whichever metric you want to use, whether it's IQ, whether it's practical application, that they improve your intelligence. And I thought that was, hugely interesting. And then looking into it further, it did make sense. Games genuinely kind of improve children's decision making, their literacy, which is, I think, something that parents would be surprised by. They'd always prefer that, their child is reading a book than playing a video game, when actually, they're in some cases more effective for your child than reading, because they engage them in a story and almost trick them into reading and comprehension and following a plot and needing to read to understand what to do next in the game, that kind of thing. So it kind of, there's lots of little things that it does to kind of round up to you being more intelligent and actually more social as well, which I found quite surprising. You're more likely to be a child that plays outdoors and considers themselves to have lots of friends if you're a child who plays video games. So, that was, I think, quite surprising. And I think just, the fact that I found out during kind of the course of this that we're actually using video games as medicine, and far more than I understood we were. So obviously, the first ever video game medicine has just been licensed now, and that's a treatment for ADHD and is showing, very interesting effectiveness. We're actually, being able to use it in lots and lots of different ways. So there's a really great program that's for people with dementia. There's a really great program that's for people who need kind of uh, it's essentially psychotherapy, but where their condition has manifested physical conditions, and it helps them retrain their brain to understand how to use their body. There's lots and lots of different ways that we can use video games, because I spoke to another scientist, a neuroscientist, and he was explaining about the kind of feedback loops that games give you are incredibly powerful, and so they can use, the application they have within science and medicine is incredibly exciting, particularly to neuroscientists, because it actually helps them trick your brain into doing things and help your brain learn new things in a way that's incredibly, yes, exactly, and it's incredibly effective. And so it was really interesting. Adam Ghazali, like he was saying that people have not taken his work seriously, that when they've said to him, call it something else, don't call it video games, and he's always been a really fierce proponent that just because they're video games, you shouldn't be dismissing the incredible potential that they have within medicine and science. And it's kind of paying off for him now. He's part of the team that have had this first FDA approved medicine. So it's really, really exciting. And for me, I'm someone who's worked in games most of my adult life, and I didn't know half of this. So I'm desperate for it to get out there.
Yeah, it's nice, especially as somebody like yourself who believes in games as a force for good, to have that backed up by science is really interesting. And people can check that out on BBC Sounds, like I say. It's really interesting, really debunks some myths about gaming, and like you say, shows off some surprising benefits that people aren't always aware of. You mentioned that definitely historically mainstream media doesn't necessarily represent gaming that well. You've been on the BBC. Can we expect more from you on the BBC in the future? You're working on more mainstream projects with them? You allowed to say?
Yeah, I can't really, not too specifically, but yes. So basically, the BBC is having a really big push this year. I was part of a project earlier this year with some other games journalists like Jordan Erica Webber, where the BBC was kind of wanted to re-look at how it covers games. Obviously, it's kind of always pushed them off into the tech side, which is not always correct. They are an art; they should be covered like other forms of entertainment. And then often, some of the things that we kind of talked about at this session were the way that games are always covered in a really basic fashion. So, someone else will get to come in and talk about a really specific niche element of film, and then games will come in, and it always has to start off with the games are a really big industry. Did you know people play video? And it's like, and then by the time you get to the end of the segment, you get to say one interesting sentence and that's it. And so they really wanted to kind of reconsider how they're covering games, to bring in new audiences, to help the BBC with its relevance in, this kind of ever more digital world, and to bring in kind of younger viewers. And so I've been really excited, actually. I've, prior to that, kind of lots and lots of what I did at the BBC was going on to debunk violence, or going on to say, your video games don't harm your children, or they're not going to, it doesn't matter if they play video games for 3 hours, 4 hours, it doesn't, that's fine. Whereas now I get to go in and I've talked about, Animal Crossing combating isolation. I've talked about, Fortnite as an entertainment platform and how it's moving forward storytelling in games. I got to make, my podcast about the science behind games, where, I wasn't asked to cover violence or debunk any myth. In fact, they would have been happy for me to turn in a piece that solely explored the kind of positive, scientifically proven benefits of games. And so it's been so refreshing and so exciting. And for me, I've seen real commitment from the BBC to covering games in a way that's exciting and interesting and uses the full potential that the BBC offers.
Yeah, that's great. As well as being a presenter and journalist, you've recently made the jump to appearing in games as a voice actor, including Yes, Your Grace. How did that happen? Like, what advice would you have people who are looking to get into voice acting?
I think for me, so I'm relatively new to games, although I, at this point, started about 3 or 4 years ago. But I've always voice acted, so it's I love people learning the fundamentals. I obviously kind of said that a bit earlier as well in terms of journalism, but I started out voice acting. So when I started at the BBC, I went to have voice training, which is where they kind of look at your voice and whether you're being as as an effective communicator as you can be. And they, I kind of spoke to my voice trainer there, asked if they knew anybody who, would help me get into voice acting and kind of voice work, commercial voiceover work as well. And so I've actually done it for kind of 10 years. And from there, then, now knowing people in the games industry,
you're like, I can do that.
Yeah, exactly. When they were looking for people, I had kind of a game that hasn't come out yet that just asked me to do it, that knew I voice acted and was interested in me kind of coming on board. And then, you just kind of hear around when people are looking for actors, which is always the least helpful advice. People are always like, how do you find jobs? I'm like, they just kind of find you, which isn't very helpful.
Yeah.
But that's also because, voice acting in games is comparatively in its infancy in terms of as a professional industry. I think it's very, very different to voice acting games than to voice act anywhere else. The money is very, very different. I would say that voice acting is very well paid comparatively outside games, and then very poorly paid inside games. And it's very unprofessional. There's not much interest in kind of the health of your voice or anything like that. And there are a couple of studios who are doing really great stuff. If you look at like OPM, who are bringing in that level of audio industry professionalism. But so it's very difficult to give kind of really great advice on how to get into voice acting, because really it's kind of this little closed industry where people just hear about work and the same people get it over and over. But I would say, again, it's another case of recording yourself a really great reel. You need a good mic, you need a professional mic. They're not as expensive as you would think, but your kind of USB mic probably isn't going to cut it. And then just putting that online. Try not to reach out to people in quite the same way that I would normally encourage people to do, because games don't really need you to email, but make sure you're in the right places, that you're joining in with conversations on Twitter, make sure that you're there's lots of great games voice acting communities that you can get involved with, and kind of get your face and your name and your reel out there. And so again, it's a little bit difficult. I think it's going to get hopefully it's going to get a lot better. There's starting to be a lot more recognition of what voice actors bring to games, and the work that goes into it, and the fact that they are an equal part of the team. And so hopefully that's going to change in the next couple of years. But for now, as before, get your face out there, get your voice out there, I guess, more specifically.
Yeah, that's good advice. Do you think there's a sort of overlap between the different types of work you do? What's it like to work on both sides, to be in games and to cover them?
I think for me, it feels all very similar. So I think my background, I'm Nigerian, and in particular Igbo, and we're known for being kind of storytellers. The Igbo language is very, it's kind of full of metaphor and allegory, and very flowery and poetic, and it's like literally it's described, and you look up the languages, kind of a language of storytelling. And I grew up with parents who are really great communicators, who really believe in like the power of talking to people, and so I've always kind of grown up with that sense of how powerful good communication is, how powerful being able to captivate an audience is, which I'm not saying I can do, but I understand.
I think you can. I think you've earned the right to say that.
And so it's all, for me, everything I've ever done stems from that. For me, when I worked in politics, I worked in kind of campaigning and writing and things like that. So it was, again, about attracting people's attention, holding people's attention, communicating what you wanted to communicate. And obviously that's very much the same in journalism, and similarly in voice acting. It's about whether you can engage people, whether you can hold their attention, whether you can pull them in and bring them into the world that you're creating, whether that's a TV show, whether it's the world within a game. And so for me, they've always felt very, very similar, because I use the same base set of skills to do all the work that I do.
Same tools. So what else is coming soon in the world of Elle? What do we have to look forward to?
Lots of stuff I can't talk about, which is like the devastating the devastating thing about what I do, is that you sign up to these really big, exciting projects like 6 months in advance, and then you can't really talk about them. But I've got a really big, exciting thing coming soon with a really big brand that I'm like a brand I've loved since I was a kid, which I'm so excited to be able to talk about hopefully soon. I've got D&D celebration, so I'm jumping on board with D&D for the first time ever, which I'm thrilled about, because I'm a huge D&D and also Magic the Gathering fan, which is having its first crossover with D&D. And so I'm really, I'm so proud and excited and honoured to have been brought on board to host a really kind of big event for them. And it's one of those kind of pinch me moments where I just look back and think, wow, if you told me 10 years ago I was going to be, hosting a massive event for Dungeons and Dragons, which is one of my favorite things in the world, I wouldn't have believed you. So I've got that coming. There's a demo for a game called Second Star I'm in coming soon, which is has big Mass Effect vibes. It's a space RPG, which I'm really, really excited about. And so I play one of the lead voices. So basically there's Dr. Lee, who's like the lead character, and you can pick one of 4 voices. I mean, only pick mine if you play it.
Yeah, obviously pick Elle's voice.
Is
that is it listed as Elle's voice in the menu? Is that what you pick?
No, that's a good point. I will find out, and I'll make sure everybody knows.
Get that in the contract.
So do you know what I mean? That's very offensive if you pick anyone other than me. But I've got that coming soon, which I'm quite excited about, and also Paradise Killer, another game that I'm voicing in that. Lydia Daybreak is my character, and that's a really interesting game, which is a murder mystery where you never know if you've got the right answer. Which doesn't sound particularly fun, but actually it's about you building a case. So at the end, it's whether or not you can win the case you've created against the character you chose as the culprit, which I think is so interesting. And it's a really brilliant game, incredible soundtrack, looks really beautiful. So I personally, it's always really weird because I'm really excited to play it, but I don't like to listen to my own voice. So
you're not going to play as yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to be muting whenever I'm on the screen. But yeah, I'm really excited about that one. So I've got that coming soon, and then kind of more work with Front Row, who I do art criticism for. So just recently I reviewed some VR theatre for them, which everybody should check out. It's by Tentacles. It's called Tempest. That was really fantastic. But kind of lots more along that line of work, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, lots of fun things. I think this year is kind of we're starting to see it a little bit more exciting work reappearing, because obviously it's been lots and lots of Zoom calls, lots and lots of doing things where we can't really see each other or do anything on a kind of larger scale than a computer screen offers, and so we're just starting to see socially distanced real on-set work creep back, which I'm very excited about. And
where can people find out more about you if they want to get into the world of Elle and follow you on Twitter, anything like that you want to share? Yeah, so generally Twitter is the best place to follow me. So I'm kind of everywhere as @Elle Osili-Wood, and that's where I post. As I said, you've got to do it. I'm always posting up what I'm up to there, what I've done, where you can find the work that I'm doing. So if you want to keep completely up to date with me, second by second, that's where I would send you. Sounds good. Thank you so much for your time, Elle. Not at all. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a Rocket Jump Events video presented by Etch Play. The archive of this video and loads of other videos, all kinds of game industry coverage, including more interviews and talks, can be found on the Etch Play YouTube channel. Remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.